So let me start by asking you about the New York Times op-ed that you wrote, and you described a war that the president was waging on the federal judiciary, an assault on the rule of law, and described it as a constitutional crisis for the country. What were you saying? What did you see at this moment that we're in?
Mike, the President of the United States has declared war on the federal judiciary, on the rule of law, and on the nation's legal profession. America is in a crisis. America is also in a constitutional crisis.
Constitutional crisis. That was J. Michael Lutic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Very interesting guy.
Oh,
not a liberal.
Hold on. Good everything, everybody. Hello.
Good everything. Good everything.
Dr. Greg Carr, how are you?
I'm fine, Professor Karen Hunter. How are you, my dear?
I'm pretty awesome. I get to be here. Thank you. I mean, got to declare the thing. I'm grateful to be here. You know, we are in a time. I was walking this morning listening to Howard French's Born in Blackness. He has a new book coming out. So I wanted to make sure I fully, had gathered everything from the previous book. And, I'm studying how these things come together, how they fall apart, the catalysts, and, trying to see how we move next. But it is wild to live in a lawless space. This is so lawless. The rule of law, all the things we've been taught to believe, about justice and the American way, just have been sledgehammered the last several months, and maybe just exposed. And it leaves us somewhat a little bit like, to me, an opportunity to build what we want to have, but also it's a little disconcerting because it means that people can literally be snatched up. There's nobody to go to. There's no legal apparatus that's going to save you. There's no court that's going to save you. And, as I watch citizens get deported to countries that they're not from, like people with actual green cards, that 80-something-year-old man who lost his green card, went to replace it. They snatched him up, sent him to another country. His family's like, he's got health problems. Like, where is he? And now they're sending people to a little country in Africa. They're not even from. I'm just like, what happening?
Well, I mean, this is the point, isn't it?
Yes. So the point is what? Like, so walk us through. We know Project 2025. We know Reconstruction. What's the actual point and purpose?
This is our. Well, I mean, obviously that's the question, and it's a question that we've been talking about, not alone. So many people have been talking about now for. I hate to use the generalization of quite some time, but for some time, and that's one reason why we started with Michael Lutic this morning, because he was on the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, which is a circuit just south of here. The Third Circuit is the one they're going to put this terrible lawyer, Emile Bouvin, if they can get him past the Senate, which it isn't at all clear that they can. Things may be falling apart at this point. We'll see. But Lutic, he was executive and general counsel at Boeing. He's on the board of Coca-Cola. He was appointed to the federal bench by George Bush, the first, H.W. Bush. He served as an assistant attorney general in the Department of Justice and was counselor to the attorney general, White House counsel in the early 80s under Reagan, of all people. Clerked for Tony Scalia on the Court of Appeals and the D.C. Circuit, and then served as a law clerk and special assistant to the Chief Justice from 83 to 85. Now, I'm raising all that to say that the first voice we heard was not even in the nominal liberal conservative continuum, he's not a liberal. You could make the case he's more to the right wing of the conservatives, but what he is someone who understands very deeply that once you tear this thing up, it's not going to go back. And I'm very encouraged by that. I would probably disagree with Judge Liddick on damn near everything. And I'm very happy to hear him talk that way. And when people hear that, they get a little disturbed and nervous. But I think what you just asked in the wake of what you just observed has been what we've been saying in this space since day one. And before that, and alongside that, what many, many other voices have been saying all along. And perhaps, like it usually happens just before election cycles and moments like that, perhaps enough people are finally paying attention. This country is going to be fundamentally renegotiated. And it sounded like rhetoric last year and the year before and the year before and the year before. And it sounded like, yeah, okay, y'all finally paying attention now? They snatching up elders with documents. And this was always the plan. So I think what we do is finally pay attention to what we have been trying to study and act accordingly. There is a roadmap. There's no enthusiasm in chaos. The enthusiasm is in knowing that we can handle this and we'll handle it because we've done it before. So I think that's the answer. The answer is to now, okay, now we're paying attention. Okay, let's go back to session one. Now we can walk through you see in 67, you see in 200, you see, okay, there we go. All right, now that we have everybody's attention, there's a roadmap. And we're seeing it right now. That's why we said this is a referendum on America. We can see it happening right now.
So I also think it's interesting that was on PBS, which has been wildly defunded, as has NPR. But there's something else going on as well, right? So you saw the merger, Skydance and Paramount and CBS, which houses 60 Minutes and my favorite show, CBS Sunday Mornings, which is also going to dramatically change as a result of this Larry Ellison's, Oracle's, Sons, Billions, like all of the threads now. Like it's like, but if we're being honest, it's always kind of been this puppeteering, hiding behind this curtain, and now it's in full display. Now, are we going to pay attention?
Well, that's the question. That's the question. How do we handle this? Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was thinking this morning that we've been doing this 281 consecutive weeks, sprinkled in with some additional things when things happen. And I realized, that the height was 50,000 people would join us, and just, the attention span and the whack-a-mole nature. It was a pandemic. No, I get it, but it was important. It was important. It didn't stop being important. These conversations didn't stop being important.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of rested on this. Everybody's not going to come, but we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Because, I sometimes like, what's the point? If people aren't going to listen, it's going to all, we got here's what we need to do next. And you want everyone to, not be harmed. But I was like, as I'm listening to Howard French, people going to be harmed. So we're
and people have always been.
Yeah, and I mean, the poor will always be the poor, or something to that effect. I was like, okay,
or always with the same. I mean, let's pause on that for a minute, because what I was about to ask you, and which I will still want to ask you, is about how those who have that momentary attention at a larger, immediate scale, I won't say long-term scale, because it's not at all apparent to me that what happens in the immediate is in fact ultimately the thing that penetrates. So I mean, what I mean to say is that at the height of a moment when no one had any alternative except to be still, what was the choice made? We saw Verdell White's birthday yesterday. We were playing a little Earth, Wind, and Fire, and you mentioned that, Philip Bailey, the Nubian, and when the world was shut down, what were the choices made? And we saw that this And what you say, you know, from the beginning, and then narrative and Nubia, that becomes a choice people made when everything's been taken away. Okay, now I have no, now I choose this. Now the world opens up again. The blitzkrieg of attempts to distract us, or better yet, to engender some notion, some profit from the distraction. So the sports blogs and the talking heads and the spectacles and all that. Now, every day there's more added, more added, more added, and mass news entertainment media purging people. So they go on Substack, and then they go on YouTube, and then that's more, 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 more. Here, there was a relative, you know, like everywhere else, what appears to be a decline, it seems to me, can be read maybe more accurately as a return to the full menu of distraction. Now you don't stay at your house anymore. Now it just dissolve. So what we have now is that core that was going to do it anyway. By the way, in advance of an anticipation at some point, there's going to be a return to the everything has been taken away. So who knows? But over the long term, that core can have, may have, I think probably does have a resonant effect that outstrips any of the things that appear powerful in that immediate moment. Look, man, this is such a happen. Oh, Diddy trial. Oh, Gorilla got arrested. Boom, 50,000, 100,000, 300,000. Okay, now what happened as a result? Nothing. They went and chased the next flashlight. Okay, what about this thing that just ticks along? It penetrates. Last night, I was up at Howard last night because the ninth cohort in something that Howard called the Carr STEM Scholars, the Bison STEM Scholars. These are all young people in a summer bridge program who now have their 4 years of college completely funded. They're in the sciences. And so we do an introduction to African Studies course for them in the summer, so an abbreviated course. And then there's a third cohort joining them now. It's about 50 students total from something called the Humanities and Social Sciences program. And these are people who are going to go on, young people who are entering their first year at Howard, who are going to go on after they graduate to get PhDs in the various disciplines and fields, including Africana studies. So and they're all leaving this evening for Ghana. And of course, as you said, Brother French's next book called The Second Emancipation is on Ghana. This is the advanced review copy, right? The Second Emancipation. He's talking about Ghana. That's where he's been the last few years, including during COVID, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana. So he's going to tie that in terms of Nkrumah and all that. Well, they'll be there about a day from now.
You just happen to have that book right there. You just happen to have it. You just
No, he
happen.
sent it to me.
I know, but you just happen to
because it to me, you know, a few months ago, and I've been reading it. Yeah, anticipation, and it's Pan-Africanism.
We didn't plan. We didn't plan this. And
we're not playing. No, we're not playing. We can't play, which is why we have this. Like we're going along like this. Whatever. Peak. No, we're not doing that. We're going straight along. But I'm raising it for this reason. Last night, these young people had half a day to move their things from the dorm where they've been this whole summer to where they're going to be in the fall, because they're going to Ghana for 2 weeks. When they come back, school will have started. So they got to be where they're going to be when school starts. So they move, and their parents came from all over the country to help them. And then last night we had a little thing, and shout out to Ronald Smith, who directs the program, Brother Smith, who asked me 9 years ago, can we do a class for them? Sure. Before the first one started. That's the only time we ever teach summer school. It's for these three programs, those two young people, those two groups in the afternoon. And all the first year volleyball, basketball, football players, the women and men's basketball, volleyball team, we do a class, the same class tailored to them for the morning. So it's 6 hours of teaching for the month.
Where do you start with this class with them?
Well, we start in our Africana Studies class everywhere. Where we start in Nubia, we start at the beginning, the origins of humanity. We walk them through, but we theme it. For example, I spent a couple of days last week with the athletes. And the last day, Lethea and I, Watkins, we took the students on the last day, and we teach that class along with Mario, Betty, the three of us, and then we added one of our proteges, Josh Myers, and we teach it together. I took them through a discussion that Kerry James Marshall, the artist, had with Bill Rhoden about comparing sports and art as competition. And whereas Bill Rhoden says, I cover the blood sports as you did, you know, football, basketball, you know, these are sports where they love Black people on the field and haven't changed their opinions off the field. And he said, to his friend, Kerry James Marshall, you have fought your way into all these art museums. You are one of the most celebrated artists in the world. I mean, he said, what's the comparison? What does winning look like in the art? And so they had this long conversation. And so I showed it to the students and we're stopping it, having and then as they gave me, Alethea and I, feedback on the last day of class this week, they said that was really one of the most resonant chords for them. There's a bunch of 18-year-olds, women's volleyball players, basketball players, men's football, basketball players. And they hadn't thought about the cultural significance of the sports they play and how penetrating these things, not just as warriors on the field, but as thinkers off the field, what it means to represent an HBCU, what it means to be in a Black space. And they all aren't Black. In fact, there's 3 white players, 2 of them from Florida. It was an interesting conversation we were having. I'm saying all that as a backdrop to this, because we started the first week, Mario took them from Origin of Humanity in Ancient Egypt. He did a kind of mini view of that. Because we started there, their analysis of the sports they played, their role as student athletes at an institution where tuition is now over, and room board is collectively over $70,000 a year that they don't have to pay, which is incredible. If you just mind-boggling to me, we couldn't have gone to school with them. But their attitude toward who they are and what their responsibility is and what they have to do as students and as thinkers was completely transformed, because they now are able to take it from the origin of humanity to where we were sitting right there in that room in Frederick Douglass Hall, about 50 of them collectively, and then another 50 in the afternoon. That where you start changes how you look at where you are. And so that I think that is the lesson of Africana studies. And that's why I will never accept the idea that Africana studies is anything other than doing it that way with a methodology. So, I mean,
that reverberation of centering these athletes, some who will go on to play professionally, rooted in African ways of knowing, especially the white ones.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In fact, it's so funny. Well, but everyone won't.
Right. I said they should, but
I agree. No, I know, but I know we know
they can't, because they don't have you, Mario Beatty and Valencia Watkins. Okay, they don't have the triple threat of brilliance.
But we're not outliers. We represent, and this is why we work so hard week after week here, and when we work so hard in Knarrative and Nubia, is to remind ourselves that not only are none of us outliers, we're part of an ongoing, unbroken genealogy. And once we regain that momentum of memory, that's why Howard's book is so interesting, The Second Emancipation, because he taps into all those Pan-Africanists, many of whom were outside Africa. So when he focuses on Ghana here, and I told the young people this week, you're looking at Du Bois, you're looking at Maya Angelou and Alice Wyndham, you're looking at Malcolm X and Shirley Graham Du Bois. All those people are in Ghana. And so, or in Malcolm's case, West Africa generally, Nigeria. And so I'm saying that we're not outliers. The challenge is we've been convinced, or they convince us, that somehow we're not only are we separate, but that we are against each other. And that just simply is ahistorical. I'm talking to the descendants of slaves now, which is fine. We're going to keep working with y'all. Y'all family. We're going to get that poison out of your bloodstream. But you're right. The reason I raised it is because last night, after they had moved and everything, now we're sitting down in the student center and everybody's, celebrating. All the young people have dressed up. They're giving speeches and the parents are there. I'm talking with parent after parent who is like, we watch y'all. We listen to y'all. And I'm saying, what? And I've never met any of these parents. I've only had their children for the last month, And so to see, what I'm saying is that one thing appears as a number in a demographic, quite another thing appears in the deeply penetrating resonance. And then, person after person, we just smiling, talking to Kelter, we said hello, I want to go to Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. I'm like, wait, where are you? Oh yeah, my childhood. We got children who were born and raised in Iowa. We got children who are born and raised whose people are from Jamaica or Nigeria, or in one case, this young brother from Congo. Now he was raised in, where was that boy raised? North, South Dakota. Anyway, the point is that it penetrates because the networks it taps into reveal two things. One, people have already been on this trajectory. And two, the ones who weren't, alongside the ones who are, we're looking for a place. Okay, this is where, All right. And I won't reveal anybody's names or anything. There are some folks around this country who are doing curriculum work for K-12 that is really path breaking.
Hmm.
Several of them, we were in conversation last night because some of their children are in the program. Now, these children were not picked by economic class. They were not, most of these people, working class folk, who are grateful now that they don't have to, they've been relieved of the burden of somewhere around $300,000 of debt if they was trying to, because their children, in fact, one brother was like, my daughter been wanting to come here since she was a little girl, and we just couldn't figure out how to pay for it. And then finally you get confronted with the question in middle school, I want to go here. And what is how much it cost? Well, how can we pay for it? And I said, I'm sure the answer you gave was the answer that she followed, which is what? Hit those books. This child never made no B's, did everything. And of course gets rewarded with this thing after an arduous interview process, which involves the students who were in the previous cohorts. And the relief and the joy combined with the idea that this is the place where we will get a deep immersion in the thing we've been doing week after week. And now with Knarrative and Newbie, I'm not going to tell him this is not that place. That to look for what we're doing, you're going to have to stay with us, because it's a range of things that go on here, all of which are important. And this isn't a critique of any of those places, but the place you're looking for is here. We jailbroke. You can't fix those places because they are running for their lives. Columbia bent the knee to the tune of $221 million. The former president, Lee Bollinger, was like, you just broke the universe. What the hell? Meanwhile, they're leaving the HBCUs alone because in part, we're useful right now to Trump. The Secretary of Education was on Howard's campus this week, touring buildings, things like that. I ain't got nothing to say about it. Why? Because that's not my concern. My concern is what we're doing right here. This is beyond your reach to influence, friends. And it is the thing that is the most effective that penetrates. It ain't this other thing. That's fine. Y'all do what y'all do. I know you got to do what you do. I know the history of HBCUs better than probably, as well, I won't say better, as well as anybody on that campus. I would say better, but I'm suspecting maybe there's somebody around who knows something and they would know it maybe as well. In fact, no, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Better than anybody on that campus. I'm not fighting y'all. Why would I do that? The AP course, the African American Studies course, African American Studies course, had its summer cohort on campus. I didn't even know about it. Now, mind you, I work on the course, but that's fine because see, the ancestors, y'all want to know how the ancestors is real. We took a break with the student athletes. I walked into the building, and the first person I saw, as I think I said a couple of weeks ago, was a brother who listens to us. Like, hey man, I was looking for you here. I said, nah, you won't find me here, brother. That's fine. But you will find me because the ancestors got it. So anyway, I'm saying all that to say that the penetrating, the resonant chord, the referendum, when you ask the people, you pour a clean glass of water, which glass do you want? I want the clean glass. Just because all the noise penetrates and distracts, when people find it, the people who want that clean glass will continue to drink from it and bring their own brick, as you would say in the metaphor, and continue to build. Now, the question I would ask you in terms of what penetrates, not penetrates, the question I would ask you in terms of what feeds those distractions, this apparatus of distraction that operates in this social structure we find ourselves in, is how do you think the decisions being made by employees of these places, I'm thinking now about reporters and anchors and editors, headline writers, how do you think that process has been affected by the moment we find ourselves in? Because as Ludwig is saying, a great deal of this is clearly illegal, but the reporting doesn't mirror that observation. They're repeating things as if, Trump reaches deal with Japan. He didn't reach the job. And then you read the story, you realize it wasn't no deal. But you wrote this in a way that has people thinking that this is what's going on, and it's not what's going on. What's going on in those newsrooms, that lead to this distraction reporting as if it's news?
A few things. First of all, personal commerce, got to pay your bills.
Yeah.
As a young reporter in my 20s, I was compelled to do what my editors expected. Now, they didn't say this is the story, but then when I became an older reporter, I realized that they don't know what's going on. And it's my responsibility to tell them, right?
Wow.
But some people never arrive at that conclusion. You know, you can get somebody in their 20s eager to be seen, get their byline in, you know what the trajectory is, how to get there, who to politic with to get, you know, because it is still a very much people game, you know, which editors to, you know, get in their faces. And then you realize the importance of journalism at some point when you start teaching and you go, I have a responsibility to the people who are reading. If my name is on it, and I remember when I realized the business, not just when I saw those front page ads or, you know, the ads that, I said front page ads, most of the front pages are ads, somebody's paying for it. But when you start to realize the business, and I didn't know it when I first got in because we were a union company at the Daily News Tribune. It was union. We were part of a union. Then they sold to a billionaire named Robert Maxwell, who mysteriously ended up in the ocean, dead. And then Mort Zuckerman bought the paper. And I started to see things that had nothing to do with media, had nothing to do with journalism and news, had everything to do with business, the kinds of editors that he hired. And then I landed on the editorial board, which was, you know, 7 people. Very few people get to sit in that seat to understand the true business of media. But it was the night that Amadou Diallo died, was brutally murdered in the Bronx, that I came face to face with what this was. When I had a knockdown, drag out shouting match, crying, screaming over an editorial to me that was so disrespectful to the body, that young man's body, and that neighborhood that he came into, that he immigrated into, and how police officers, 4 of them, could just fire off 30 bullets into a vestibule that could have hit anybody. And, you know, that fight that I had with my editor about that editorial saying that not to rush to judgment. And I asked him a question: could they do this in your neighborhood? Could they fire off bullets in your neighborhood?
My God.
And he looked at me and he said, this is not my paper. This is not my paper. This is the opinion of the publisher. And a light bulb came on. So we are experiencing that, whether it's Bezos owning the Washington Post, the South African that owns the LA Times, Rupert Murdoch, who, you know, Wall Street Journal and all these other outlets who's, you know, telling Trump, knuck if you buck, brother, I got all of the information. But that's cosplaying on some level, right? It's WWE, because they're going to battle it out because it's personal to them. But we're not getting fed. So in many ways, you know, you ask a question, and it's a question we should ask all of ourselves. We should all ask, how are we being informed? And then the task will go back to episode 1. Get your Ida B. Wells on, because there are things going on out there. And what made her extraordinary is that she was willing to go out and find the information, and everyone can do that. Everyone who lives somewhere, things are going on in your neighborhood. We all have a cell phone. We all got these little social media platforms. Let's bombard these spaces with actual news and overwhelm the sensationalism and the fake news. And I hate using that term, but it is, because it's all manufactured. If I own a paper, damn it, you're not going to write anything bad about me. And if I own a paper and I have the power to be able to direct, and the editorial board particularly directs how people view things, I was like, wow, the power of that. That's why these billionaires are buying up these newspapers. That's why they're buying up these local news outlets. That's why they own all these, because that's how you control the people. But we're the people and we live places. So we can tell folk like Darnella Frazier held up her cell phone when George Floyd was being murdered, and the guy who got hemmed up by the police in Staten Island for showing us what happened to Eric Garner. We don't have to only show tragedy. We can also show triumph. We can also show, struggle and victory. We can show all of that. Now, we don't, just like we jailbroke the universities, we can jailbreak media, and we must. I think we must. So
how's it going? How's the latest step in that process going? The move?
It's challenging, because what I realize is people are prepared for the real vision. And so I got frustrated for a big minute, because I was like, oh, you just got $1 billion in. You should be able to do this. And they can't, because they never considered it. And they probably don't even imagine. And that's what's surprising to me, how many people don't even imagine the possibilities. They're right here.
Right
And
here.
they require a whole lot of money. So
No.
yeah, I'm both optimistic and I'm like, people aren't ready at the same time.
No question.
Ready. I mean, it must be super frustrating. It must have been super frustrating for Ida B. Wells to be out there in the streets, getting her life threatened, trying to tell people this is happening, and not seeing folk, people scared. So I don't want to get involved in this. You're gonna get us killed,
Yes.
But they're gonna get you anyway. So you might as well. What would happen if we all stood up? They can't get all of us.
They can. And that's whatever they believe in, bless Stephen Bannon and Russell Vogt, in particular, those two, Steve Miller, whatever they believe in, I hope it blesses them. But the reality is that their efforts are driven by a very deep and keen awareness, particularly a guy like Steve Bannon. Maybe less so Russell Vogt and them, because they're religious ideologues. It appears to be political operatives, but they're really religious ideologues. They're very narrow religious extremists. If you look,
What religion? What's their religion?
well, we talked about this many times, and this has nothing to do with Catholicism and everything to do with Catholic extreme. And they're not even Catholic. I wouldn't call them Catholic. As I've said before, they are to the Catholic Church what I tend to think of Al-Qaeda being to the Muslims. Y'all are mistaking. I mean, I know it's severe to make that comparison, but when you start talking about theocrats, you look at Kevin Roberts, for example, who has spent a great deal of his professional work as a teacher in private Christian academies. This is after coming out of undergraduate and graduate training, where he was received as a very kind of affable, kind of middle of the road figure, very smart. We talked about his dissertation. We didn't talk about his master's thesis, which follows also some Africana in terms of its subject matter. But then he goes off and work in these religious spaces and these charter schools. One he founded, then he went and joined one. Now he gets pulled into the Heritage Foundation world. And when you hear him say on television, by the time you get to him saying that this is about to be a revolution, and they say revolution, and is it going to be violent? He says, if the left doesn't make it violent, it won't be violent. If they allow it to be peaceful, it will. He's a crusader. This is the mentality of a Christian crusader.
I wasn't asking what's their religion as much as I'm poking, like South Park.
Oh man, Chef's Kiss. Oh, and by the way, I should mention in passing on the YouTube side, because I got both the Nubia and the YouTube sides. The good brother Michael Bailey, who was part of the African American Studies AP cohort, the brother who came out and said, "Hey, brother, told me to tell you hello." He's in the YouTube right now, so just let you know. I'm telling you, I want you to know that, because I saw him pass by and I know it. So anyway, you saying South Park? I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make that.
They're putting on Front Street the hypocrisy of this religious thing that you're talking about. It's not religion at all. It's not religion at all. You got the Bible, you got Jesus, but you're not following any of it. So we should just keep calling it out. That's not religion. You don't care about God, or you don't care about Jesus, or it would look different. You're not followers of Jesus. You're not. You're just not. And we should stop calling them Christians. Call them what they are.
I don't disagree. I would agree with you. My only reservation would be, I think what you said, and it may even be worth contemplating. I'm always sitting here writing notes. I'm sure many people catch this as well. When you give those, it's like African proverbs. They are small, but as the Yoruba say, they're the horse of speech. They're small, but they reveal so much more. And it's put at a place where you can use it as a point of entry. When you said, everybody's not ready, I think that's real. I think everybody's not ready for accurate. I think everybody's not ready for a real consideration of what it means to say that you're a Christian or Muslim or Jew. Because it's John Clark, your ancestral colleague from Hunter College, founding chair of Black and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. John Clark would often say that Christianity is a male chauvinist murder cult. So the idea that it can be redeemed, we're not ready to have a conversation because Christ is not a Christian any more than Marx was a Marxist. So y'all are using somebody as an avatar. And then you say, I'm a Christian. See, this is what I'm saying. See, you said, but you open this door, probably. You say, everybody's not ready. So but that's my only pause. Now, that having been said, the people who embrace this notion of generosity of spirit, who are truly trying to be in sync with and in the rhythm, whether or not, and this is again, I don't know if we're ready for this, whether or not there's something that happens after you die other than you continue in the cosmic journey of material. So in other words, whether or not you're going to pearly gates and going to see your mom again and with your own eyes, whether or not, I'm saying the people who embrace what we generally label as Christianity, who aren't staking their practice and their walk on the expectation of an eternal life payoff, but rather on the ethical following of what appears to be the ministry on earth of Jesus of Nazareth, those people, these extremists, would not call Christians. In other words, they would say, you people are naive, this is about power. And if you turn to them and say, but Jesus wouldn't, they would say no. And then they cherry pick the verses from the Bible that basically reinforce for them the belief that they are supposed to have dominion over the world and all the other humans. And their notion of the great commandment becomes a declaration of war against all of us. And the crusades, this is Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon. This is Russell Vogt, who came up in another religious extremist kind of narrow at the Office of Management and Budget, because he has spent his adult life penetrating the federal apparatus to try to figure out how to make this ideology work by shrinking all of the government down to a king and then putting the right person in place so he can sign executive orders with his crayons and you can say F the courts like his lawyer Emile Bove did. And Vault, but at their heart, their ways of knowing would be reject. Well, and here's the soft point, the weak point, I think. Because again, John Clark would say this: the reason what they called Christianity was to spread so effectively, and Islam in Africa, is because those Africana, what we call Africana ways of knowing, were very generous. We're not going to put you out based on what you believe. So they're able to penetrate, because while they would do this to you, you wouldn't do it to them. This is the king. This is the whole idea. And this is where Dr. Clark raises this question, which I don't have a good answer to, and I don't know that he did either. He said, we must practice the essential selfishness of survival. And at what point do we say, we're not going to become you, but we're not going to let you continue to do this? And I think that's where we are in this country. There's a referendum now. You're not going to put your hand. Did you see the brother in, where was he? In Harlem, the black man, what's his name? It'll come to me in a minute. When those ball players from Washington Heights and the Bronx and ICE came to snatch them, and he said, I will die before I let you do this. I don't know if you saw him. Did you see?
And it was one black man, and all of the, and those cowards, coward. And I said that because it can't stand up. This is what I'm saying. If we all had that, I watched a couple things. James Tallarico, the state representative from Texas, did a 2.5 hour interview with Joe Rogan. And, there's been clips of him, but I actually sat with this man and I said, more of this, somebody that actually believes and is willing to stand on business. If you're going to believe and follow, care about people. That's what it looks like. More of that, and more people like that brother. And it was another brother behind. So he wasn't totally alone, but when he walked in there, like, no, what you're not going, they all, because it's righteous. It's righteous. And you feel that energy, and energy is real. People don't even know. It's like your fear precedes you. But your righteous indignation also, when you come into a space knowing that you're right, and the consequences may come. But that man was not afraid, and they were, because really you can't stand on business for wrong, but for so long. Look, in fact, you sitting there covering your face and you out here snatching people up for some dollars or maybe for no cents. I'm sitting there like, at some point we're seeing the toll, and it ain't even been that long where the attrition rate is high. Can't stand in that long. Yeah. So
absolutely right. Yeoman Wilder. What a name. It's like, Trump is obsessed with central casting. That's a name straight out of a Toni Morrison character in Song of Solomon. Yeoman Wilder. His name was Yeoman, this black man. and you think about, and again, for everybody who says, oh, you Hispanics don't like us, and what we got to do with these Africans? You have been programmed against yourself, because that simply falls apart with a little bit of historical study. And if you don't have time to study history in the moment, look at current events. That man, Yeoman Wilder, was a man of African descent and born and raised here in the United States, whose people came out of captivity here. And the people he was defending included a lot of people whose families were not born here, some of whom have that genealogy that people want us to turn against.
He's a
And he
baseball
would
coach. Baseball
yeah.
coach. Those are his babies.
Those are his babies.
You're a teacher. I'm a teacher. I wish somebody would come in my class and
My
like it's so much more personal when you're with those children, coaching or teaching.
That's right.
Chef's kiss. Shout out to him. Yes.
And we recognize, again, we're not setting aside the politics at all. We're placing the politics in the context of, to use our Africana studies framework, our governance thinking. Who are we to each other? In the social structure in New York City, you see the current candidate for the Democratic nominee to be the mayor of New York, Mamdani, in a space at the Wu-Tang concert the other night. Looked like Jamal Bowman brought him in there. In fact, that's what they said. And we see the video. Yeah, man, I got a ticket. I got to bring somebody. So, okay. So you see him there with Jadakiss and all the rest of them. You see him there with the RZA, and they talking about affordability in New York City as opposed to having to move out to Long Island, which is very interesting. He said, we got trapped in Brownsville. How do we do that? He said, well, you make that a place you don't want to leave. He said, yeah, I agree with that. I'm thinking, okay, so, and the cynics, of course, and the people who are agents of chaos and bots and weaponized ignorance and that for all those, among others, on social media saying, oh, he's just pandering. Whatever. You're not going to vote anyway. In fact, are you human? And even if you are, it doesn't matter. You go ahead. There are enough of us in this referendum on America that is beginning to build that will, that can, I don't know if it will, history is never written until it's done, can overwhelm you. But I'm raising that in the same spirit as we saw this good brother Yeoman Wilder and his comrades there refusing to let ICE do what it is apparent now their strategy is in a place like New York, because they do know if you bust up in a classroom or in a ballpark that you might get more, you will get more than you bargained for, little man, with your face covered. If you were a man or a woman, you'd go out there with no face covering, but we all know you're not. So what they are demonstrating, though, is that there is a solidarity that exists, and it can be and must be strengthened. And whether it be them in the park, what the strategy we see now is, what I was about to say is that now what is clear is that they have a strategy of seizing children whose citizenship, we'll talk a little bit more about citizenship in a minute, whose citizenship is probably unassailable, at least as long as there's a rule of law. And I think that it's absolutely under attack, as Judge Liddick said, but I also think that it's a lot more resilient than the votes of the world and the Steve Bannons of the world want people to believe, and we'll come to that as well. This is also parenthetically about a footnote, a critique of my friends on the what they would call themselves as the revolutionaries, although I don't see much revolutionary they're doing, who would say that, in this duopoly where the parties are the same and the judiciary doesn't matter, that somehow not participating in the two-party electoral system is an advance. This is for you as well, what I'm about to say. What I just said, which is the rule of law does exist. It is under the absurdist attack that it is from the federal government, particularly the executive branch. It's under that attack precisely because they have to create the illusion that it's not. We fought too hard not to use this tool too, electoral politics, in other words. But the strategy in ICE coming out of this executive branch with this man who thinks he's a king and people willing to allow him to think that as long as he can do what they want him to do, their strategy would be to grab the children whose citizenship is unassailable, and I think will be upheld ultimately through the federal courts. And we saw this week the Ninth Circuit in California, a 2-1 ruling said that the nationwide injunction issued by a judge in the wake of this previous decision by the Supreme Court is indeed constitutional, because they told him, well, you can't have national injunctions anymore, except maybe if you do a class action, at which point the ACLU filed a class action for young people, birthright citizens, and that allowed the judge to impose a national suspension of Donald Trump's absurdist executive order. And well, the Ninth Circuit this week on a 2-1 decision, the dissenter didn't dissent on the constitutionality or unconstitutionality of birthright citizenship, but rather on the question of jurisdiction. So it was a technical objection. And in every other way, the dissenter agreed with the two who voted in the majority to say that you can have this nationwide injunction under this class action theory. And by the way, birthright citizenship is constitutional. It was the first time a federal appeals court has said anything on the merits about birthright citizenship being constitutional, and the Ninth Circuit said it was. Now we'll probably see the full Ninth Circuit, or perhaps as Bozo and as Trump and his friends, Pam Bondi and others will likely do. They may go to the rocket docket, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the shadow docket, and try to get it right before their people on the Supreme Court. And I'm not at all certain that they will be able to prevail on the merits of birthright citizenship. They may try to attack the idea that you can have a nationwide injunction through class action, but I don't know how, because when they tried to destroy the concept of nationwide injunctions being issued by federal court judges a few weeks ago, they said an exception could be class actions. So in order for them to do that, they would have to literally contradict themselves, and the ink ain't dry on their opinion. So it'll be interesting to see them fight with themselves, which all comes back to the broader point. I'm out of the footnotes now, out of the parentheticals, into the broader point, which is that there is a rule of law in the United States of America that is being tested by people who want to create the illusion that if enough of us get together, there won't be one. Number two. And finally, number three, when we become aware of it and kind of catalyze our actions to match what we become aware of, we will break their political backs. And that's why the phone calls were made between Washington, D.C. and Austin, Texas last week, week before, where Trump calls Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas. And it's like, I need you to squeeze a few more Republican seats out of for the congressional district, one that you already got 2/3 of. Most of the 48 Congress people out of Texas are from the White Nationalist Party, even though they only comprise, in terms of those who vote, 55% majority in terms of those who vote in the Texas legislature. They've got a super majority in the Texas legislature, just like in Tennessee and some other places. And even though demographically white people are the minority in Texas, somewhere just north of 40%. Mike and I were talking with Gary Bledsoe, who was the longtime president of the Texas iteration of the NAACP. And in talking with him, we had that conversation about the numbers. And we know that demographics are not destiny, at least not political destiny, because you can peel people off. But as the former president of the Texas conference of the NAACP, Gary Bledsoe said, the pushback is enough if we organize enough, even just among the people of African descent, the people of indigenous descent, called Latinos, and the white people in Texas who are not white nationalists, of which there are millions. That's more than enough. And when Trump calls Abbott and says, find me 4 or 5 seats, and then they send a letter that I'll talk about in a minute from the Department of Justice, which quotes Brett Kavanaugh for a reason I'll talk about in a moment, to try to give some cover and justification for them. Guess who was like, hey, we need to leave these numbers alone. Y'all know we the white minority in Texas, right? Y'all know if we push this far enough, the engine is going to seize up and the whole thing going to blow up. That's the white nationalist legislators in Texas. So if you heard the debates in the Texas legislature this week, then what you heard was not only a pushback from some of the folks there, and they were testifying. They were before the Texas legislature testifying. They were in session. They had public commentary. There's one of 3. They're going to have 2 more sessions for public comment. The public comment people came in and overwhelmed it. They shut it down. Then Democrats went to another room and continued the public commentary on the floor of the Texas legislature. Senator Boris Miles, good brother, Boris Miles, taking on this Senator King, a white nationalist who was fumbling with the microphone like Dennis the Menace, looking there because he know what it is. Greg Abbott kissing the ring of his Lord and Master, Donald Trump, who tells him, calls down there and say, hey man, I need some more seats because we may lose the whole Congress in this next midterm because enough people are pushing back. There's a referendum on America going on. Find me some more seats. So Abbott adds to the agenda of the special session of the Texas legislature, called ostensibly in the wake of the tragic floods in the state. He adds this. Well, let's look at those districts. Let's look at those 5 districts. Well, and these 3 in the Houston area. Of the 5, 3 are in the Houston area, and 1 is in Dallas-Fort Worth. These are the black districts. I might as well mention what happened. As I said, Trump calls Abbott. Abbott gets a letter July 7th from the Department of Justice, which, as if you watch the rest of that frontline interview from J. Michael Ludick, he will say that there is no precedent for a president of the United States interfering with the Department of Justice. Just like there's no precedent for all them executive orders. The interviewer from Frontline asks Judge Ludick, he says, other presidents have done executive orders. So that day one, when he was down at the arena in Chinatown, he signs all these executive orders. It was, it's different scale, but other presidents, and Ludick stops him cold. He says, hold on. There's no president in the history of the United States that has signed one executive order of the nature of what we're seeing right now. Don't do this both sides. And again, this is the thing you just explained us, to why people might do that. But ultimately, this is you're spreading the dirty bomb of this ideological war, and it's contaminating all of the public, social, commercial, public-facing mass news / entertainment media to raise this insanity to the level of normalcy. Well, yes, but other people have done. Ludick was like, nah. No. And he got one of them reticent kind of sitting perfectly still, except his mouth moving kind of approaches, chin slightly down into his spreading belly as he continues to say, no, there's no evidence. There's no executive order that's ever been written by a president. Yeah. So don't do that, because you make the spectacle of a WrestleMania style executive order signing sitting in what used to be Capital One Arena, whatever they call it now, where the Wizards play. You make that into something that can be normalized. Well, yeah, it's different, but it's not that different because Biden signed executive. Don't do that. Ludick was like, don't do that. But in the process of those executive orders, as I said, Trump has weaponized, is trying to weaponize the executive. And in the case of the Department of Justice, he has put his badly maligned former Attorney General of Florida, who didn't go after Epstein the way she should, Pam Bondi, in charge of the Department of Justice. And he is now directing her to do certain things. I mean, go through all them documents, take my name out them Epstein documents. Okay, look, your number 2, who was my defense lawyer, who I put at the Department of Justice, is very good friends with Maxwell's lawyer. In fact, they was on each other's blogs and vlogs, and they was talking about how much they're best friends and all this kind of thing. Very good friends, not best friends, very good friends. And so you send him over there and y'all make a deal. You communicate to him, through him to her, that, look, you keep your mouth shut or whatever, tell a lie, whatever you need to do. I got a pardon in my back pocket waiting for you. So at any rate, he's weaponized the Department of Justice. So they send this letter to Texas July 7th, and they say, hey, look, we think that there are several districts that were racially gerrymandered, which is illegal. And then they cite, of all cases, the Allen versus Milligan case. And if y'all been paying attention, we all been paying attention, you know that in Louisiana and in Alabama, the concerned people in both those states and beyond those states sued the state of Alabama, sued the state of Louisiana, went to the Department of Justice, went to the courts. Ultimately, the Supreme Court found that, found in the case of Alabama, which is why Shamari Figures is in Alabama, in a second majority non-white district in Alabama, in the Birmingham area, joining the Black Belt kind of generated Congresswoman Terry Sewell out of the Selma area. But the courts said, yeah, under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, this could be construed and should be construed as a unconstitutional racial gerrymander. You've cracked and packed in ways that it can't be denied are racial. Maybe we'll see, probably we'll see, hopefully we'll see the same thing happen in Louisiana. But I bring all that up to say, in the letter July 7th this month, that the Department of Justice, signed by Blondie and a deputy over civil rights, so to speak, Wish we had the days of Kristen Clark now, don't we? I know the people who say both parties are the same don't know who Kristen Clark is, don't know what she achieved, and really couldn't tell you much more other than both parties are the same. Revolution, revolution, revolution. Yes, I'm talking to you. I don't care whether you clip this and use it for clicks and likes and views, because it'll drive people right back to here where you'll actually get walked through some of this. Wish we had Kristen Clark back at civil rights now, instead of the white nationalists who are sending letters to Texas saying that you need to do something about these Negro districts around Houston and Dallas, Fort Worth. Now, mind you, 2 of those districts are represented in the Houston area by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Congressman Al Green. No, they are not flaming revolutionaries, but yes, they are much, much, much preferable to the alternative, which is what they're trying to get to in Austin right now, except as Senator Boris Miles, as he confronted Senator King and said to him, do you know why they are trying to do this? And what do you know relative to these phone calls between Trump and Abbott? And what do you know about this deliberate attack on these districts? And then this guy sitting there like Dennis the Menace with his hands gripping his microphone like a teddy bear. I have no direct knowledge. No, because you weren't on the phone. You weren't on the phone when Trump called Abbott, but you were on the phone when Abbott called you. And whether he divulged as it came out that the call was made, because guess what? The man pulling the puppet strings been gassed up by Russell Vought and Kevin Roberts and Steve Miller and Steve Bannon to believe that he is a king and he can just tell it all at any given moment. So he done already said, I called the governor. Talk to you. You ain't supposed to do none of that. Litigants sitting back like, no president has ever interfered directly in the governance of the states. Yeah, they have. A little differently, though. Because Lyndon Johnson damn sure called the governor of Arkansas and the governor of Alabama. Kennedy had that conversation. Anyway, not to get off track. Well, I'm not off track. Actually, it all works together. But my point is this. As Miles is confronting King on this, and King is sitting there, he like trying to maintain his plausible deniability, behind the scenes, the white nationalists in the Texas legislature are very nervous because while Trump is like, squeeze a few more districts out, and as Gary Bledsoe explained to us this week at the NAACP in Texas, as you've got Democrats, including a lot of white Democrats in Texas who were like, okay, they may not be able to flip that district from Democratic to Republican, but what they may be able to do is move enough voters around so that while the Democrat retains the seat, it won't be Jasmine Crockett. It won't be Al Green. And if any of you all believe that regardless of the desperate attempt by the white nationalist party to maintain a slim majority in the federal legislature, the United States Congress, one aided and abetted by the fact that, among other things, the soft white nationalists in the Democratic Party haven't worked hard enough to get the seats assured that have been lost because people died in their seat in New York, Arizona, other places, Texas. And I'm not even saying soft white nationalists now, between, the new ancestor Sheila Jackson Lee and then the new ancestor Sylvester Turner who followed her. Now that seat is one that Abbott is keeping open. This is a problem. But for those of us who would think somehow that this is the only calculus in this attempt to steal these seats in Congress, we're not paying attention, because Donald Trump's objective is to get rid of those irritating N-words. Those irritating N-words. I want Jasmine Crockett gone. I want Al Green gone. I don't care even if the Democrats maintain the seats, but the Republicans do care. So now the Republicans in Texas are like, look, we understand, we share your sentiment. We too, rah, rah, white nationalism to the wall. But if we push this time in this way, at midway through the regular 10-year cycle of redistricting, we may piss off enough people in this state, including in those districts, including in other districts, because when you crack them, you got to send them somewhere else. So you're going to weaken the infrastructure of an already teetering apartheid political system in the state of Texas, where while we only win 55% of the last vote, we control 2/3 of the seats in the legislature, which means 2/3 of the congressional delegation, and we are 40% of the population. We're going to eventually lose out. I don't care how many Latinos you pull off. You pull off with internal racism in the Spanish-speaking community. I don't care how many Negroes you distract with podcasts and artificial intelligence and bots, at some point that is going to fail because there'll be too many that aren't dissuaded, that are organized, that are brought into this. And when you were sending masked punks in to put their hands on children, you're not going to get any support for that. Certainly not and you're in Texas. And you're going to start talking about deporting people with families. I mean, even the Bible-toting white nationalists in rural Texas are like, yeah, we understood. You were all for getting people out. But X, who works at the restaurant, or Y, who cuts my grass, or Z, who picks all of my food, they're good people. Could we get an exception for them, Lord and Master Trump? No. Well, now I got to go vote against y'all then. And by the way, your friend who killed himself, who you say killed himself, even though there are gaps in the video, he was a little girl lover. And his lieutenant was too. And she didn't just help him, enable him. She was in it, participating. And you don't want to release the files. The thing is on the verge of a referendum for all kind of different reasons. And so what we saw in Texas, what we're seeing in Texas this week, is a problem. And when I saw the letter, read the letter July 7th from the Department of Justice, which has now been converted into an extension of Donald Trump's whims, which, as Judge Liddick said, if you watch the entire Frontline interview, he attributes to this kind of permanent animus. And he quotes Donald Trump by saying, Trump himself said, I'm going to use this Department of Justice to punish my political opponents, my political enemies, which is unconstitutional on its face. What you're seeing now in Texas, they're like, yeah, we might lose these seats that looked safe. Now, it was very interesting to see, though, that, as I said, reading the letter, the Attorney General and her deputy tells Texas that what these districts are doing is unconstitutional, and they quote, of all Supreme Court cases, the Allen versus Milligan case, the Texas case, and they cite Brett Kavanaugh. Why is that important? Kavanaugh did not dissent in Allen versus Milligan, the voting rights case, Section 2 of the Voting Rights, 1965, out of Alabama. He concurs in a 5-4 split. Now, of course, Alito was against it, Thomas was against it, all this kind of thing. But why does Kavanaugh join? I think Kavanaugh joined in part because it allowed him to put a poison pill. Sometimes that's what you do in a concurrence. You put something you believe that the rest of them don't. But he says, I concur with the majority on most of this, but I choose to write separately because I want to emphasize something I want to talk about. Or I concur in part, I dissent in part, which is what happened in the Ninth Circuit in California, the 2-1 case, where the judge is like, I'm not talking about the merits in this dissent of birthright citizenship ruling. I'm just saying, I don't think we have jurisdiction in this regard. In every other way, I agree with the majority. So you can do that. The letter they sent to Texas used Brett Kavanaugh's concurrence, where he says, basically, what does he say? He says, yeah, I understand at one point, making sure you have this racial plurality in these opportunity districts like in Alabama and Louisiana and Texas was important, but it shouldn't be open-ended. At some point, this has to end. This is what they call making it the ish up. This is Sandra Day O'Connor in the Michigan affirmative action cases saying that pulling a number out of either her hair or her behind and saying that, maybe 25 years, we won't need affirmative action. And then they see, she said in 25 years, we're going to, no, she just only know what she threw a number out there. Well, Brett Kavanaugh in the voting rights case of Alabama, Allen versus Milligan, says, I understand at one time you did need to do this to enhance the rights of African people, of Black folk, because they've been discriminated against. But, this shouldn't be open-ended. It isn't open-ended. Yeah, that's why you stuck that concurrence in, because that's damn sure the language that the Department of Justice used when they sent that letter to Texas 2+ weeks ago and said to them, hey, it's time to look at those districts, including them 3 around Houston and 1 around Fort Worth, with the troublesome, they didn't say this, of course, but the implication, troublesome Jasmine Crockett, the troublesome Al Green, these Negroes in office, and you need to revisit them. Well, Texas is very nervous about this. They're very nervous about this. By the way, that Ninth Circuit 2-1 ruling this week, the first time an appeals court has ruled on the question of citizenship, birthright citizenship on the merits, while at the same time really being about whether or not judges can issue nationwide injunctions using class action as the way to do it. All of this comes in response to Executive Order number 14,160, 14160, which of course is one of the ones that Bozo signed with his crayon as Russell Vogt and them prepared them in a blitz with Stephen Miller and others to try to overwhelm us with the idea that they actually have the constitutional authority to do what they did, which of course is not true. In terms of a federal constitutional argument, Donald Trump has about as much right to end birthright citizenship as he does to put a cap on name, image, and likeness, or about as much right to end birthright citizenship as he does to force the Washington football team to change its name back to the Redskins. About as much authority in the executive order to end birthright citizenship as he does to make me change my name. In other words, he doesn't. Okay. And the courts now, increasingly with a crisis. We heard this week, for example, John Boy Roberts finally responding after he has torn up the floorboards on his funky settler criminal enterprise. I'm sorry, John Boy. I've been saying this for a long time, and I will continue to say it, although I say it in probably a little bit different way. Some people might not like the way I'm saying it, but the simple fact of the matter is I do understand that there are some people who can't hear it the other way. But let's try the other way just to see. John Roberts, who by leading the Citizens United case in 2010, opened the door to the stream of money that has kind of fed the weaponized ignorance and the destabilization of politics in the United States of America, leading to these razor slim majorities for the white nationalists as they have kind of converged in this moment. John Roberts, who in his attack on everything from voting rights and affirmative action to a woman's right to choose what to do with her body, including to end pregnancy, has continued to kind of advance what has been his much more subtle, but nevertheless potent kind of religious predisposition as far as I'm concerned. I think he too would fit on the outer edges of the religious extremists in regards, certainly as regards to attitudes toward whether a woman can terminate a pregnancy or not. It's a very Catholic, I think, even broadly Catholic approach to kind of lording it over women's bodies, don't you think? In fact, John Clark would say, why you were limiting it to Catholics, Greg? I think perhaps that is because these are, after all, male chauvinist murder cults. But at any rate, just thinking about that. So John Roberts this week issued a letter reminding Stephen Miller and the rest of these people, Russell Vogt and them, that who regulates how the federal courts move in terms of how they approach their work. And that's the Chief Justice of the United States of America, because when Stephen Miller was out of power and the billionaires funded his legal team, his America First Legal, whatever the name of that little enterprise is, Miller sued, saying that the president of the United States, the executive branch, is the one in charge of the courts. An absurd constitutional argument. But again, Russell Vogt, between sips of tea and looking up in the sky to imagine what the theocracy would look like that he wants to live in, one that would elevate his rather damaged self-concept. God only knows when that self-damage occurred, but no one can deny that in the wake of whenever it did occur, Russell Vogt is a nasty piece of work. If y'all want to read about Russell Vogt, you can, go and read about his life journey. But he has now developed this notion of this kind of outsized, powerful executive, tapped into that notion. And now they think that the courts are under the thumb of the president of the United States. Well, John Boy Roberts finally pushing back a little bit this week issued a letter say, no, I'm in charge of how the courts move, baby. Just separation of powers, separate branches of government. I only wish that he had thought about that last month when the Supreme Court ruled that the executive branch can get rid of people in the agencies. Well, and again, this comes from the same vein that Senator Day O'Connor pulled 25 years out of either her hair or her behind and said maybe affirmative action can end after that. The same vein that would have some of these justices just make arbitrary kind of proclamations. When we talked about Ketanji Onyeka Brown Jackson's dissents a couple of weeks ago, we kind of went through some of this, but it comes from the same vein for John Roberts and his crew last month to say that the executive branch can just get rid of people in the at the departments, the administrative departments, education, all these other places, transportation, you name it, the cabinet level positions, which were created with Congress, meaning you got to have congressional approval. Well, the Supreme Court says, yeah, you can do that, but not the Federal Reserve. Why not the Federal Reserve? It's an agency too, right? Well, there's a special. Oh, see, y'all just making stuff up. That was Atlanta Kagan and sort of you and Jackson. Y'all just making stuff up. Why would you carve out an exception for the Federal Reserve? Even as we saw Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, walking with Donald Trump with hard hats through the building that's being renovated, literally dragging him for filth on the cost overruns while he's beside him, he gonna get rid of Jerome Powell, y'all. And these markets around the world know it, and they're very nervous about that. But hey, why should the United States be the only people to get assaulted? Then the financial system of the world perhaps needs a little tweaking, more than a little tweaking. But the Supreme Court says, yeah, he can do that. Not the Federal Reserve, because Federal Reserve. And Kagan and them are like, oh, why not the Federal Reserve? Oh, so y'all just making it up at this point. This is Ketanji Brown Jackson's point. But I'm saying all that to say that these executive orders that Trump is signing, most of them worth less than the paper they're signed on, and the magic markers he likes to draw on paper of various types, including notes to his friend Jeffrey Epstein, but including these executive orders where he draws on, puts his name, and then shows him to everybody like he did something, while the people standing behind him with the smirks, them Russell Voigt's boys, because they're the ones that prepared all this stuff. None of it constitutional in terms of the most offensive ones, as Judge Liddick was reminding us. But as that is going on, as all that process is going on, all of that now in pursuit of this institutional strain, people are pushing back. People on their own team are pushing back, as we see the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and them release the files. You know what's in them files. You know what's in them files. And it ain't just Republicans. There's some Democrats nervous too. Aren't they, Governor Clinton? But at any rate, doesn't matter. That institutional strain, there's those people pushing back. There are people in Texas in the legislature who know that if you continue along this vein, along this line, at some point, you're going to see a collapse here in Texas. Plus, you ain't supposed to be calling here anyway, talking about find me some more seats. Now, in the interim, while they had this special section, they're having these special sessions. The Democrats in Texas can slow this down by denying the Texas legislature a quorum. That may be their only play. Y'all probably remember when Tom DeLay was in Congress and they were redistricting, white gerrymandering in Texas. That at one point they got on a plane, the Democrats, and flew, I think it was to Oklahoma somewhere. Well, this time they sent delegations out during the recesses. One went to California, another went to Illinois. I don't think it's any coincidence that this week you saw Gavin Newsom in California and J.B. Pritzker in Illinois floating the possibility that Illinois and California may go into their legislatures and look at gerrymandering at the halftime mark, the 5-year mark between the regular 10-year cycle of redistricting to reflect congressional seat losses or gains. There will never be more than the number of Congress people there are now. You just move them around depending on where people gain population and lost population. And Texas continues to gain population, although 9/10 of it is non-white. These white nationalists know that their future is written in stone. But at any rate, those two governors saying, maybe we should look at redistricting. Maybe we should use it as a weapon. Well, members of the Democratic Party in the Texas legislature visited both those states over the arc of the last week or so, as Texas has floated in this special session the idea that perhaps they should redistrict. In fact, they're going to try to redistrict. Well, guess who else is pushing back? It ain't just the people in Congress who want these Epstein files. It ain't just the people in the Texas legislature who are like, you're going to overburden this, and then we're going to lose some of these other seats, and we got a real problem once that momentum gets going. It's also people living in Texas who have now been polled a couple of times. I read a poll this week where the majority of people, including about the mid-40s of so-called Republicans, many of whom I would call white nationalists, open white nationalists, who are saying that this is the majority of voters in Texas poll, who said, likely voters, by the way, that's an important distinction, who said, well, actually, this special session was called to deal with these floods and disaster relief. We don't like the fact they're talking about gerrymandering. In fact, we don't think they should be talking about gerrymandering. That's including 44% of the Republican likely voters poll. This is a problem for the Republicans. All of this fitting under the broad category of crisis and spectacle. Okay. as Judge Liddick would say, if you watch that interview, if you continue to watch that interview, J. Michael Liddick, he says one of the first things you go after is the law. You go after the judges, you go after the lawyers. And this is a crisis in constitutional norms. It's a crisis in basic norms. It crosses several, as the former president of Colombia said, several serious, grave lines, legal, constitutional, and basic. That's what Lee Bollinger, the former president of Colombia, said in the wake of Colombia giving these people $221 million. The executive orders are increasingly cartoonish. The statements are increasingly absurd. But we often normalize it in commercial news, entertainment, public-facing mass media, which is, of course, what makes these spaces so very important. And there are a lot of them. We don't do we have, over the arc of the last year or so, certainly with the political stuff going on here in the United States of America, given more focus on this than we normally would, because we know we started with the anchor of historical memory, and we will continue in that vein. But in continuing that vein, we're also mindful of the fact of the world that we live in, where we have to really think about this. But this, Russell vote hasn't slowed down while Trump is signing his cartoon signature on everything from, like you say, change the name or no NIL or put a cap. Where Russell vote is now lining up to challenge the Impoundment Control Act. That's in Congress. You probably saw this week, the Department of Education released some billions of dollars, $5+ billions that had already been encumbered and allocated by Congress through the Department of Education. You saw this week that other funds, while they've been clawed back by the Congress because they voted to take funds back, other funds are being released. Well, Russell vote, even as this week they attacked the General Accounting Office, the GAO, because the GAO is tasked in the Congress with telling them how their money is our money is being spent, that they voted to spend in a certain way, and what the implications are. Well, vote don't want nobody looking over his shoulders while he's trying to pull off his theocratic move under the guise of politics, and they're considering challenging the Impoundment Control Act. What is that act? Well, that act ensures that Congress controls the purse strings, among other things. Vote has a theory of something. Vote and his boys have a theory of something, his boys and girls, or maybe Trump's boys and girls, as he has written about them. But Vote and his people have a concept called pocket rescissions. What's a pocket rescission? A pocket rescission would be a loophole in the law that allows the executive to spend money differently or not spend it at all that Congress has voted to spend and that the President of the United States has signed into law. How would that happen? Well, Vote's argument is that if you send a request not to spend money that Congress has encumbered, like this $9+ billion that they got quote unquote clawed back, is what the commercial news entertainment media called it, from places like NPR, places like the PBS. And by the way, there was an article in the New York Times a couple of days ago that talked about how in the wake of this almost $600 million clawback, the donations in both those areas have moved up, have surged. Many of the places that face these cuts are in rural areas which serve some of these same people that voted for Trump. And many are not, including Washington, D.C., where WHUT, the only public broadcasting corporation entity that is controlled by historically Black college at Howard University, is facing a $1.33 million cut, which will severely undermine its ability to do what it does, because it has a very small staff here at PBS and WHUT. But donations have surged. They're not yet anywhere near the number to replace the number that Congress gave back, because MAGA Mike Johnson works for Donald Trump and has said as much. And John Thune in the Senate is a little less open about it, but no less compliant. Even as it doesn't match the money that Congress gave back, those donations are a form of referendum as well. They are a political referendum. People are voting with their pocketbooks, trying to, and PBS and NPR aren't going anywhere. They may be wounded, but they are not eliminated. They are not defunded in the sense. They are defunded in terms of our tax dollars being sent to them, but they're not defunded in terms of their other donors, which make up the majority of donors to public television and public radio, including private donors, but also, state entities, other entities, nonprofits. So you see, they're not going anywhere. They will be severely weakened. And the ones who may be weakened the most are in the places where the people who voted for this white nationalist and his friends will be shocked to learn, wait a minute, yeah, they also cover local news. Yeah, they cover that news that you get from where you're from. And guess what? Maybe they should consider getting rid of that first. So at any rate, let me continue with this. Russell Vogt wants to get rid of even that. Because under his theory of pocket rescissions, what he says is, we asked y'all to take this money back, and you voted to do it. But if we get within a 45-day window before the end of the fiscal year, if we ask for that in that 45-day window, that month and a half or so window, if we ask you to withhold money during that window, and then that means that we can just withhold it. Why? Without you voting on it. Why? Because whether you vote on it or not, we're in a window that says it's too close to the end of the fiscal year for you to vote on it. So then the fiscal year expires, and with it ends the authorization of funds. So we win. What? Oh, no, that fiscal year is over. We have to close out the books. Yeah, but y'all, there were $45 million. No matter. This is clearly unconstitutional, but Russell Vogt is that guy. That weird little fella is out here testing all the boundaries. And by the way, Donald Trump is along for the ride because he also gets to settle some political scores. I don't know if you all saw the current chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr. No relation. Well, then maybe somebody who had my people captive was named Carr in the Caribbean or somewhere, and maybe that's his people too. It really doesn't matter. That name doesn't mean anything to me. I thought I had it around here somewhere, but I probably put it in the other room. I shouldn't even be reading it anymore because why the hell? No, that's not true. Like you said, Prof, the why we do it isn't just because people aren't necessarily paying attention. People may be getting ready to pay attention now. Yeah, here it is. Of course, I had it stuck up on this here. I was doing a little sorry I say bedtime reading, but I have a regular hours anyway, so it don't matter. Chapter 28 of a little bedtime reading called Mandate for Leadership, page 854, actually, because we were talking to Mignon Clyburn, who served on the Federal Communication Commission with a dude named Brendan Carr. You see, he wrote chapter 28 of Project 2025 on the Federal Communications Commission. He's now the commissioner. That's the guy who's leading the commission that had to approve that merger. You talked about that Skydance merger. And when asked directly on Fox News whether or not firing Stephen Colbert was a condition for going through with the merger, he didn't answer the question. Instead, he went on, let's say, a rant. You could call it a rant, but this is what he said. The host on Fox News was Bill Hemmer. Hemmer asked him a direct question, whether the Colbert firing had anything to do with Trump. Was it conditioned? This is Trump settling political scores, right? And we know that, Colbert loses money. He's the highest rated of the talk show hosts. But if losing money were a criteria, then you wouldn't have Seth Meyers. You wouldn't have Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon. They're all losing money. But that's not to say that's not a factor. But let's be very clear. He asked him specifically, did Trump have anything to do with it? And this is what Brendan Carr, who wrote chapter 28 of Project 2021, telling you what he was going to do if he could run the FCC. This is what Brendan Carr said. He said, here's what's important to keep in mind. A broader dynamic. Well, damn, anything comes after that, you can really kind of dismiss. I won't say dismiss. Brendan Carr's another ideologue. He said, so did Trump have anything to do with getting rid of Colbert? This guy, first thing he says is, well, here's what's to keep in mind, a broader dynamic. That's a yes and no answer. You could have lied like propaganda. Start say propaganda Barbie, and now I've said it. The White House press secretary, you just get up there and lie. No, and keep it moving. But instead, because like a lot of theocrats, because the true believers anyway, they believe they're in a righteous cause. They are they don't want to lie. If you listen real close to Russell Vogt, Kevin Roberts, they do not think they're liars, and they don't want to lie because that would be offensive to them in terms of their worldview, in terms of their way of knowing. So the first thing Brendan Carr says, well, here's what's important to keep in mind. Focus on this, a broader dynamic. Did he call him or not? No. That's not important. What's important is the broader dynamic. Can you hear it? What? Listen very carefully. Oh. Onward, Christian soldiers marching as to war. Here's what's important. The broader dynamic. You see, he goes on to say, when President Trump ran for election, he ran right at legacy outlets and Hollywood. There it is. The culture war, the ideological war, the religious war. Like you said, Prof, fake news, I don't want to use that because, because they framed it. Well, you didn't say because they use it, but because it has been so imprinted in our minds as fake news. Well, of course, that's where he came up with. That's where Trump showed up coming down the escalator. Obama wasn't born in the United States, and this is fake news. And look at the media. Look at them. You should punch them in the mouth. And guess what they did? Aired that ish night after night for ratings and propped up a monster that NBC had created on The Apprentice by creating the illusion of competence, this failed businessman, failing upward his entire life, and then you're fired. Become like he's some kind of corporate titan. All of this propped up, perhaps inevitable, because this clash was probably inevitable. If you understand the history of the world and the history of the United States in particular, it was coming down to this all along. I think people are now finally paying attention. You begin to think about this. But, Brendan Carr says, here's what's important to keep in mind, a broader dynamic. When President Trump ran for election, he ran right at legacy outlets in Hollywood. There. So litigants, like, once he gets in, he attacks the courts, attacks the lawyers. That's Russell Vogt getting in. Now I can start wiring this stuff and uploading the Project 2025 into the operations of the government, federal government. On the side of media, which Trump understands, to keep his visceral hillbilly horde in line, he got to keep projecting this. So he's weaponized all this stuff. And then you got one of these cats, Brendan Carr, who was on the commission before. Now he's running the commission, and he's in charge of the people who were in charge of approving the merger. And Trump adds this rider probably onto this. And by the way, I just don't like Stephen Colbert. Get rid of him as part of the thing. Okay, fine. Because South Park, what they did is 1,000 times more provocative than what Stephen Colbert did. Plus, Stephen Colbert is actually using words and language and irony. South Park, they just basically putting together some stuff that should be offensive to anybody once you stop laughing. But the point is this. And he didn't do that. And plus, them two dudes that created South Park signed $1.5 billion deal for distribution rights, global distribution rights. So, and by the way, footnote, don't say nothing about Ryan Coogler until you say something about these South Park boys getting $1.5 billion for to retain their rights and have global distribution rights. But at any rate, so he didn't put South Park on there, although I suppose that episode had aired a couple of weeks ago. They'd probably been on there too. He put Colbert on there, and then when asked by the Fox News anchor Bill Hemmer, Brendan Carr, running the FCC, author of Chapter 28, Project 2025, says, here's what's important to keep in mind, a broader dynamic. When President Trump ran for election, getting his base up, he ran right at legacy outlets, fake news, and they had enabled him showing that stuff. And Hollywood, oh, this is the problem. He says, and Hollywood and New York elites behind it. Okay, here we go. So now you can put the Hollywood and New York elites. Hey, of course they're behind it. And sometimes they're frenemies and fight. You saw Joe Biden's son mad at George Clooney and them. Sure, they fight. Do y'all have a dog in that fight? Only if you let it be. But he says, when President Trump ran for election, he ran right at legacy outlets and in New York and Hollywood and New York elites behind it. And he smashed the facade that these are gatekeepers that can control what people think, what Americans think, and what Americans can say. And once you do that, you've exposed the business model a lot of these outfits are have as being nothing more than a partisan circus. I agree, Brendan Carr, we agree. But he said, when you listen to him, he said the loud part out loud. They said it on every page of Project 2025. And he voiced their objective. The purpose of institutions in the minds of these white nationalists is to weaponize the government, to control thinking and what people can say, and to use your tax dollars as the weapon. That's not what he said. Let's go back and look at it. He said, when President Trump ran for election, he ran right at legacy outlets in Hollywood and New York elites behind it. And he smashed the facade, meaning I am destroying the illusion that these are gatekeepers. They are gatekeepers? No, they are not gatekeepers. I'm smashing the facade that they are gatekeepers that can control what Americans think and what Americans can say. Okay, so now you're after Hollywood in New York, you're after the film industry, you're after the news media industry, that anybody can oppose you because you don't want them controlling what people think and say. You smash the facade that they can, and they can't, by the way. That's why, Marvel realized there's a whole market out there that you need to make in all these non-white moviegoers, whether it be Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, whether it be any of the Marvel movies, superhero movies that have non-white characters in them, Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, you name it. Black Panther. Well, the moviegoers saw that and they said, well, this was a failure. This wasn't a failure. Black Panther showed up huge. Yeah, because black people caught to it. It resonated. They want to make money. Sure, profit is their bottom line. So you're saying, well, the white nationalists hate that. They don't want that. They mad at the Superman movie, even though it's almost all white people, except, of course, for Perry White and Mr. Terrific and a few, handful of others. I went to see the Fantastic Four movie in the middle of the night, Thursday night, because, we can really go to Kemet. So when I'm going to squeeze this in, I don't want to wait 3 weeks. And okay, no problem. And, there was one black character there, but again, the Fantastic Four, why they keep making this Fantastic Four movie, and why did they make this one in a kind of retro 60s look, even with the futuristic technology? And I thought, parenthetically, a great rendering of Galactus. I was like, oh, this is the best Galactus they've done in these Fantastic Four movies so far. But at any rate, why put it in the 60s? Well, it's also signaling the sense of where Marvel came from in terms of its origins. The tumultuous 60s, the social movement, social protest 60s, also the button down 60s in the terms of the echo of the 40s and 50s, the Mad Men era. Well, the 60s kind of represent all of that. So it's interesting to see. But of course, these MAGA folk don't like that kind of thing because they see it as also that woke, liberal, and Superman's too woke. And the Fantastic Four are too woke too. I shouldn't be using only Southern accents to refer to backward inbred, cultural inbreds in terms of these political philosophies. But Brendan Carr is like, Mr. Trump and me and all the rest, we're going to smash the facade that these people can control what Americans think and what Americans can say. That sounds good until you think about the fact that it's not that they are against the principles of controlling what people in the United States of America think and say. It's that they want to be in control of what people think and say. And since they can't stop Hollywood, New York, they can't stop you or me from going to movies or making your own movies now with the technology, doing whatever the hell you want. Since they can't manage all that, their last hope to hold on, the last stand they have to hold on in this country is to seize the apparatus of the government, federal and state. As a phone call from Washington, D.C. to Austin, Texas makes apparent in these past couple of weeks, they got to seize control of that. They have been working since the end of the so-called civil rights movement to recapture that apparatus. Make America great again, if you will. And he goes on to say, since we've smashed the facade that Hollywood and New York control what people think and say, he says, once you do that, this is a direct quote from Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC, which this week approved a merger after you get rid of that little tick, Stephen Colbert. Oh, damn, South Park, too late. You know what? We can fix that again. We'll figure out a way to get rid of them too if we can. Wait, 1.5 B. Wait, global right. Wait, if you try to get rid, this is a nettlesome task. Did anybody read? Nobody read that? Okay, y'all all at Trump rally, no problem. He goes on and says, once you do that, you've exposed the business model of a lot of these outfits as being nothing more than a partisan circus. Well, isn't that your business model? Except your business is no longer primarily private business. Your billionaire friends, Howard Lutnick, Commerce, and Scott Bessent, Treasury, all of them now in the government. So your primary objective now isn't private dollars. That's not your business model. Your business model now is our money. So what Brendan Carr basically said in his answer, in addition to never answering whether or not Trump had anything to do with it, what he basically showed you all is their thinking. We capture the federal apparatus. We capture some of these state apparatuses, as many of them as we can, and prop up this window we have. We can use this money to advance our ideological agenda, which is to shape how people think, which is to shape how people act accordingly. And again, in that direct quote, what does he say? He says, gatekeepers that can control what people think and what they can say for sure. But he talks about this broader dynamic, meaning that we can then begin to attack the people who don't think and say what we want them to think and say and what we believe. And that's what's behind the attack on the universities, the attack on the lawyers and the judges, the attacks on anyone talking. So I thought we had freedom of speech. Yeah, you do. John Roberts is a freedom of speech absolutist. Some more of his disastrous opinions with his majority. The Hobby Lobby case. The idea that 303 Creative versus Alennis, where you say, well, I don't have a website set up doing business like this, but once I do, I don't want to do it for people with same-sex marriages. Oh, I don't want to bake a cake. Okay, you have the First Amendment right to do it. And Hobby Lobby, we're Christians, so Christians the way they define it. So we're against these type of behaviors. So we don't have to cover with insurance this, or we don't have to pay. Okay, no problem. You don't have to do that as well. We can get rid of employees who are same-sex or transgender because we don't agree with their values, and it's not discrimination. We have a First Amendment right. John Roberts is down for all of that. Now we're at a point where comedians are taking swipes at the president, deservedly so. And the question becomes, can they do it? The question is, yes. Brendan Carr is like, yeah, but we got to approve the mergers where y'all make more money. And we have smashed the facade that you're in control of it and replaced it with the reality, at least what we think is the reality, that we're in control. But guess what? Here's where we're going to come to wind to a close in a moment. That's an illusion too. See, the referendum on any country will not be held in that country's executive branch by its presidents or prime ministers or kings or queens. It won't be held in the legislatures, its Congress, its state representatives or Congress people or senators. No, the referenda is held in the power, theoretically, of the people. And when you reach an event horizon, a point when enough people begin to push back, what you will see is that this crisis of spectacle, throwing stuff in the road to stop things like these Epstein files, okay, release the Martin Luther King papers. Ain't nothing in them 250,000 pages. I haven't gone through the 250,000 pages. I glanced at some of the files. I kind of looked through. I asked some people who are King scholars. And then, when you read the mass commercial news entertainment media and you read our platforms, you will see, I think Mike just wrote something. Somebody wrote something on Contraband Camp. What you see is that, yeah, scholars are generally, this consensus was reached quite quickly. There's nothing very much new there. And remember, 2027, and we talked about this before, in 2027 is when they're going to release the recordings, the tapes. People think they're going to hear some salacious stuff. So what if you do? We talked about that already. We said we prepare people for what might happen and what you shouldn't let distract you. But at any rate, them tapes ain't even on the table anyway till 2027. That's just the crisis and spectacle. The chaotic press conferences this week where somebody recorded Trump basically telling all of the lackeys in Congress, listen, if they attack you, if they ask you about releasing these files, you answer with Biden and Obama, his racial obsession with Barack Obama. Call everything a lie, then go back. And then, of course, you see Tulsi Gabbard trying to claw her way back into good favor this week, deploying that, calling Obama a traitor. And it's like, yeah, but them files that you call yourself and found something new in them, the same files that reinforce the fact that there was interference in the elections. But hey, you heard the playbook for your boss, this whole notion of crisis and spectacle. You're for it. You're trying to do it. Well, the institutional strain that comes from that is being pushed back. There are referenda now being conducted by the people, whether it be Yeoman Wilder in that park, Washington Heights baseball coach there at the Harlem Baseball Academy. And by the way, it looks like most of the young people who participate in those activities haven't come back to them. Because spreading fear is about, this is what it's about. But of course, when school starts, you're going to bust up in some schools in Brooklyn. You're going to bust up some schools in the Bronx and start snatching people. You're going to find this referendum going to get real funky real soon. And it's not going to be people standing behind microphones looking timid. It's going to be people in the street. There are bills in at least 3 states in this country that Trump and them will call sanctuary states that are arguing by state law that ICE should not be putting masks on their face. Now, they're bound to fail because these are federal entities, but at least raising it reinforces the idea people don't like punk-ass people jumping out of vans with ski masks on, putting their hands on old folks and children and anybody for that matter. There's a power struggle going on. So is there an erosion of democratic norms? I don't know that I would call it that, because this MAGA obstructionism is part of the long arc of U.S. history. When you hear Judge Liddick, and this is one thing where we disagree on many things, he would say, well, this is the first time, and this is the most egregious act by a president. Every president of the United States, from George Washington through Abraham Lincoln, did more egregious offenses than Donald Trump. Why? Because we were in captivity. I understand, because, litigants are soft white nationalists. And I'm not talking about that in terms of ideology. I'm talking about that in terms of orientation, a way of knowing in the social structure that he kind of props up, and out of the governance formations that he was born and raised in. The worshiping, we talked about this kind of unintentionally on Friday on Urban View Mornings. We talking a little bit about what you studied when you were in school. And I didn't make this point directly, but I'll make it here in 10 seconds. Every book you name is a white book, whether it be Shakespeare, whether it be the Greeks, Sophocles and them coming all the way through the Scarlet Letter and all that stuff, Nathan Cooper, and then coming to F. Scott Fitzgerald all the way through. You drop a few Negroes in, Ralph Ellison, maybe Toni Morrison, something like that's cool, but let's be very crystal clear about it. The curriculum itself is an exercise in socialization and power. Look, it comes out of that. I ain't mad at him for that. I understand he will not rule over me, just like I won't rule over him. If you're going to have a different entity, you've got to elevate everybody's humanity. This is my problem with citizenship generally. It's got to be people. And it is people in the second part of that first sentence of the 14th Amendment. No person shall be deprived of due process of law or equal protection under the law. But in that process, then, we talk about an erosion of democratic norms. I'm not sure I would call it that. This obstructionism coming from Make America Great Again is consistent with the origins of the entity. The only time you see the pushback at a level that changes the entity is the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. There are moments in between, but let's be clear. Those are the watershed moments in trying to renegotiate this moment. Well, guess what? As William Barber might say, or Roland Martin, or anybody else, this could be a third Reconstruction. I don't know now even that I would even use that language, because we're at a moment of inflection that is different even from the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement, because these white nationalists keep coming back for a rematch as the numbers begin to continue to crater on them. This is a moment where what's under siege isn't just the norms we've kind of been born into, but the concept of the polity, the concept of the entity, which was always going to have to be renegotiated because it was founded in a crime. You understand? And while all that's going on in the world, China moving inexorably to the heart of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, the UNESCO. That's the stuff on scholarship and historical sites and public memory. When these young people go to Ghana from Howard this week and they land in Ghana and they look around, some of that stuff there is going to be connected to UNESCO. China is outside. Why? Because Trump and them have decided for the second time, did it the first term, the United States withdraws from UNESCO. UNESCO is like, oh, okay, let's keep going. Why? Because we got money from all over the world and people know what this is. And all you're doing is reinforcing the idea that the United States is not interested in global humanity, which it's never been. That cultural collapse is real. And I'm saying that we have to come up with, as we conclude, a new governance philosophy or a renewed governance philosophy. That's why we go to Kemet. If y'all remember last year, if you go back to in class sessions 230, 230, and 231, we were in Kemet. If you go the year before that, we were in 178 and 179. Go to sessions 178 and 179. I would encourage you to go there because you'll see why we go to Kemet. And for these next couple of weeks, we'll be talking about that, why we go to Kemet. It isn't just to get a historical consciousness. It isn't just to see the sites and the monuments and the tombs and temples. We do all that as you all go back. You can go back and look at those things. And then coming forth, I'll tie some of what we've already done to what we're doing. Because, again, as you mentioned at the beginning, Prof, when we ask, what do we do? Now it's like, are we finally paying attention? Okay, now we've got a whole corpus. We got soon to be up on 300 of these, not to mention the fact that these, in many ways, are the front porch to the deeper work taking place in Knarrative in Nubia on Monday nights. By the way, shout out to everybody who came last Monday when we had that conversation. We'll continue with that coming up. Remember, we're finishing Aique Armagh this week, but we go to Kemet, and part of it allows us to talk about a new philosophy of governance, to engage in comparative governance. If you all who are in Nubia, as we're doing the Introduction to Africana Studies class, in part one, we looked at social structure before we went to governance, the first two categories in our framework. In the first category, social structure, we looked at the Kemetic social structure and the Greek social structure. Remember, governance is who we are to each other. So in the Nile Valley, over the arc of thousands of miles, what we call them, you have clusters of people who are in governance formations. These villages, these little towns, these little networks of farmers and families in the Nile Valley as far back as 6,000 years ago and before. But then you see a social structure emerge as those things are connected through the creation of a larger polity, what we will call now the Pharaonic age, maybe 5,000 years ago, a little over 5,000 years ago. So we see those big pyramids, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. That's from the so-called Old Kingdom, around 2700, 2600, 2500 BC, so to speak. And so about 44,500 years ago to 4,700 years ago or so. That is the creation of a social structure that pulls together all those governance formations. And we can engage in comparative analysis of what they did, which, as we are reading Ayikwe Armand now in part 2 of the Introduction to African States course, he connects in the first 8 chapters to the stories he was told in Ghana, where those young people are going, where his elders, his mother's mother in particular, said, we came from there. We came from the Nile Valley. We came across as we populated, and we brought many of those values with us. So we can then begin to compare good governance. And by the way, to put a close on that, as we connect to what you asked at the beginning, Prof, as to how we open with these young people we're teaching, with that momentum of memory, we understand that when those people were human trafficked in those boats and end up over here in places like Louisiana, Virginia, and Brazil, and Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago, and New York City, and Boston, and Florida, as they are brought here, what did they bring with them? They bring with them the ways of knowing, their governance formations, their adapted use of science and technology, their cultural meaning making, and their movement in memory, so that what they bring with them is not something where they come and say, oh, democracy, I like that, George Washington and James Madison, I want that too. No, this is not the minstrel show of Hamilton, the Broadway play. This is the reality of Africana projecting itself into this hemisphere. I have a young brother in the social sciences and humanities cohort traveling to Ghana. We had him in summer school this summer, from Mobile, Alabama, my man, who knew all about Kasula Lewis, Oluwade, who knew all about Africa Town, who knows exactly where it is, who's making all these connections. He gave one of the 4 closing speeches for the first year cohort last night. And sitting there listening to him, I was so inspired to hear, because that momentum of memory unblocked allows him now to connect all those things together. We head to Kemet to look not at citizenship as relationship, because there was no concept of citizenship as we studied during the intro class, part 1, when we were looking at social structure. There's no concept of citizenship that has yet been discovered in Kemet. We're not looking at bureaucracy as the central thing, not as the pharaoh. We're looking at the underlying ways of knowing and looking at the connections. So and why do we do that? Because that comparative work, anchored in work like Jacob Carruthers, The Wisdom and Philosophy of Governance in Ancient Kemet, which is where we get the concept of governance from that we use in our African States framework. The wisdom of people like Asa Grant Hilliard III, Baba Bafur Amankwati II, and his article, Why Study Egypt? Why Study Kemet? All this stuff we have looked at. It's the wisdom of governance among African people that allows us to put our common humanity over whether or not somebody got a piece of paper or not. And thank you, Larry, for walking us through the question of passports this week during your show on Sirius XM. This is why Mamdani with the RZA, Sin, and Wu-Tang Clan ain't just spectacle. It portends the possibility of moving together. Who we are to each other has to always take precedence over state formations. And we see that in Kemet with revolutions in the Old Kingdom. We see it in Kemet with the return to values of the Middle Kingdom. We see it in Kemet with the lessons to the damage of Kemet that take place in the so-called New Kingdom. This is Ramses and Hatshepsut and Jehudimos III. When you expand the borders through empire building, perhaps too far, and overextend yourself and invite into the Nile Valley subsequently in the so-called late period and even the Ptolemaic period, people like Alexander of Macedon and eventually, the Ptolemies, including this person named Cleopatra, who was not of African descent. You invite in their chaos. This is what empire building does. You keep poking around out there and something gonna come back on you. And in fact, that's the lesson of the Fantastic Four. Anyway, but I think that's where we are right now. I'm looking forward to these next couple of weeks in the Nile Valley, and we're going to continue in this conversation. But the referendum on America is, and really on any government in the world, but certainly here in the United States, we didn't do a lot of foreign policy this week, but that referendum is really one that really depends on what we're going to do. And by we, I mean everybody listening, everybody you're connected to. So
I cannot wait. Got that reverb again.
Do we? Oh,
Yes, that's okay. It's all right. I just wanted to. You're leaving. You're leaving soon. I want to wish everyone who's going safe travels. Um, as every time we come together, there's always this special magic that happens, which is why it's important that everyone who is listening to find their community. Maybe it's not this one. I'm very mindful that this is not for everybody. Everybody ain't ready for it. Everybody doesn't have the constitution to be in this community that requires something of you. You don't just come here and spew. You're gonna sit. You're gonna learn. This is and you're gonna treat each other with love, dignity, respect. I know it's difficult, especially in spaces that have, as South Park pointed out. Poor Cartman. He was like, what do I have to do now if everybody gets to say all of these words and treat people horribly? Talking about South Park. But, we are setting the bar a little bit differently, and there are rules of engagement because first we're family, a global family, that a long history family. And so we're going to treat each other accordingly. So I just want to wish you safe travels. And I just want to, again, thank you for trusting me. I got a note yesterday from Laree. She was listening to Urban View Mornings, and she said, as the children would say, when you thought of that combination, you were in your bag. And I can't express to you. I wish it could be 5 days a week. Let me just say that too, because
no,
I know you ain't got the time to do it, but it is good.
no. I will say this. Time is, we were talking about this last night. One of my colleagues, who's at Howard, happened to see her. I was way to think. The university is a concept. Prof, we both know this. We spent to collect it between us. We got 50 years in at universities, which is bizarre to say. You know what I'm saying? We got 50 years in university, and not just any kind of universities, working class universities where often it's majority non-white people and white people across the board. No university I'm aware of in the world, really, but certainly here in the United States, no university is not nervous about what's coming up next because they don't know how they're going to sustain themselves. What we're doing, getting ahead of that, it's going to increasingly look like, and by the time everybody, no, we already did that. And you can't, this is what I'm saying. So I wouldn't even,
Let me say, I would start every class. I taught at Hunter for 22 and a half years, 23 years, NYU at 3 years before that. And I would start every class telling my students, this is a business. So, especially if you're majoring in media, whatever the hell that is. I was like, what is that? What is a media major? What is a journalism major in this world? Because I don't know what journalism is. And this has been for the last 20 years that we have seen the erosion. So it's not just Trump. And I said, it's a business. So stop changing your major. Stop incurring all of these costs. Nobody asks you your GPA when you get out. Get out, get into the world, learn your craft. I'm going to give you the tools and get busy. Now you're teaching something that is even to me more foundationally important, which is a sense of self and grounding in that. If you know that, you can do anything. But these universities are a business. And I was like, do you know what the president's job is? Raising money. This is a business. Treat it, get what you can get out of it, unless you're majoring in biology or chemistry or something that is important, engineering, things that we need. We need to get that right. This other stuff, these liberal arts majors, stop wasting your parents' money, your money, because most of the kids at Hunter were working themselves through school. Nobody was paying for them. So what we're doing here, though, doesn't cost that much. And self-directed. And you have a whole community to back and forth with. I'm going to start reading books. That's something I'm committed to. We have so many books now on the bookshelf. You and I have done so many videos that we embed in the books. Those of you who are part of Nubia, spend time in Knarrative, get the bookshelf, form a little book club, sit with the content that we already have there, and let's build on that. We are going to win. Well, I don't want to use win and losses anymore because I feel like I learned from this guy that's how white people experience joy, through wins and losses, whereas Black joy is rooted in community. Their joy is winning at all costs. So
when it makes competition, it's interesting. I showed the young people, the athletes, student athletes, a clip from Man Friday, the Richard Roundtree movie, where it's told through the almost like a governance gesture. What if when Robinson Crusoe showed up, the guy he named Friday was really with a village and a community, and so it inverts it. And remember that scene there on the beach, and Peter O'Toole, who's playing Robinson Crusoe, sets these almost like pylons up and tries to teach Richard Roundtree the value of competition and winning a race. And he says the purpose of this is to enhance your health and your body by running. And so he says, ready, set, go. And then the white dude takes off, and Richard Roundtree's just jogging in place kind of slowly, and he moves down. And then when they get to the end, he says, you didn't even try. And he said, I thought you said the purpose was to feel good. That was very pleasurable to me. Move. He said, no, the purpose is to win. He was like, but I thought you said the purpose was exercise. It reminds me of Race at the Top, the book where I interviewed the author a while back, and she was talking about how when these Asian parents moved into this high school district, the white folks reacted by taking over the PTA, and part of the reason they took it all over, they wanted to emphasize sports teams and extracurricular activities because the Asian students were there to get these grades and learn this stuff. And they said, we don't care about the sports teams, because if you want to exercise, you can do that at home. And we got stretching classes and everything. No, we got to be on these teams. We got to fight. So when you say winning, you're right. Winning through competition to get to the finish line. No, if the purpose is health and community, the finish line not important. But you're absolutely right. Cultural meaning making, you see the shift. And the athletes, we had an hour-long conversation after that, because of course they are there not to enhance their physical health, but to beat the other teams on the field.
Let me say that that's been a challenge for me, because I'm super competitive. And when you think about how we have been indoctrinated into this notion of wins and losses, defining humanity, defining your character, it's a tough thing to pull yourself away from, and you realize how indelibly etched it is in our psyche to win and to lose, and to how to lose it with grace and all this other stuff we've been taught.
We went through community, as you said. We went through community. We went through networks. In fact, thank you, Prop. That gave me a second to clean a couple of things up. I mentioned you before we went on. I want to thank our sister, Sister Nina Gilbert at Morehouse, because they didn't have a lot of paraphernalia from the Swingman Classic. She brought me this Atlanta Braves hat with the only kind of A from Atlanta Braves that I might even consider putting on. Plus, it's a white hat, which means I'm probably going to put it in the museum. But anyway, this is what they had. They had Morehouse on the side. So I'm like, okay, she said they didn't have a lot. But the crazy thing about it is she was in Philly. She spoke at the Alpha convention, and Lamont went up there. So she left me the hat because she wasn't there when I went up. You know, I've been going up every week for my Freedom School kid. But she left it with Lamont to bring to me, and here's the bag. And the thing I love about this bag is the bag from the All-Star game. I'm looking at this like, oh, this is the bag they had for the Swingman Classic, which is the whole reason that Nina went over to the stadium, because this is the classic that our brother, as we talked about it, talked with him last week, Roy Wood, was covering as a baseball guy and a black man who knows baseball and knows, you know, the importance of having black folk in baseball. And Ken Griffey Jr. is the one who put the swing man. That's why Nina was there. So I'm like, I love the hat, but I'm glad you brought me this plastic bag too, because I wanted something to be able to tell that story with a visual. So it's just that how we win is community.
Community.
If the Negro Leagues were still here, I would be fine with it. It'd be beautiful. They go to Birmingham Black Bear. But guess what? Ken Griffey Jr. played for the Seattle Mariners. But guess what? Because he's Ken Griffey Jr. playing in white Major League Baseball, now Major League Baseball, he had the clout to put together the Swingman Classic, and now there's an annual HBCU All-Star baseball game. We can win. We win. We just got to have governance. Who are we to each other? That's all.
That's it. And I would be remiss if we didn't.
We wear this oppressive.
With this, let's pay homage to our brother. Rest in
Absolutely.
power. What a beautiful
Yes.
person. What a beautiful person. You're a beautiful person.
I'm sure you did. I've been ripping and running. Did you play him and Bob Omentosho talking? Because you know they were very good friends.
Yeah, no, Dr. Black, Dr. Daniel Black was on the show on Monday.
That's what I thought. Okay, yeah, I knew. Yeah. Okay.
So,
Well, hey, listen, y'all. If you're on the YouTube side, like, share, subscribe. On the Nubia side, I see there's some information about rallies taking place this weekend. Some of the Stop the Steal stuff and all that is very important. And we'll see everybody Monday night. And yeah, let's listen to our brother, man. God bless him as he makes his transition into ancestorhood. We ring that bell for Malcolm Jamal Warner. I shall. Love you.
love you too.
We wear this oppressive air with such an impressive flair. Only the few astute, truly fascinated by the truth, dare view our struggle to survive as art in motion. For we are abstract, admired for how we create culture from scratch with scraps. And like indigenous land, we watch it get co-opted, ransacked, and raped. And then draped in lies of meritocracy to justify the equity gap. And we dance and we rap. You see, the art of being black is often an acrobatic act in defending black humanity in a world that worships a pale, long-haired Anglo-Saxon savior, even though the Bible clearly describes him as a bronze-skinned, woolly-haired Hebrew.